Hello everyone and welcome to the fourth and final episode of our series on The Dark Knight Returns with Issue 4, The Dark Knight Falls. I hope you've enjoyed this series as much as I've enjoyed recording it. Sorry that it's taken so long to finish this series, but the end is finally here. And if you're just joining us for the first time and this is the first video in the series that you're watching, I would highly encourage you to go back and watch the playlist on my channel that has the other episodes of the series first. That way you can understand what's going on. And for the people who have seen the rest of the series up until this point, I'm going to do a little bit of a recap right now of where we are in the story. The most major event of the last issue is that the Joker returned and resumed his killing spree, which costed hundreds of lives. Oh shoot, I didn't turn on this light. Hang on. There we go. That's better. I love how it bleeds onto this side of my head. I sure hope I figure out a way of fixing that. Furthermore, the seeds are now being planted for a final confrontation between Batman and Superman. Meanwhile, the Sons of the Batman are continuing their violent war on crime, which is not doing much for Batman's negative image in the press. And at the end of the last issue, after the Joker mercilessly turned Batman's innards into ground beef with a knife, the Joker ended his own life so that the city would finally turn on their hero, Batman. Now he is not only a menace and a social disease in the eyes of the press, but he is also a murderer. And Batman knows that the society around him will be fully willing to kill him for what he's supposedly done. And Superman cannot be too far behind them. He now has enemies on all sides, and his luck is beginning to run out. He is bleeding out inside the Tunnel of Love. The Gotham City Police Department is right outside, and it seems that there is no escape left for him. And this is where we pick up our story in Issue 4, The Dark Knight Falls. So let's get into it. But first, a word from our sponsor. I'm on a mission to make content creation my job, and to do that, I need your help. In the description, there is a link to my Patreon where you can support me in exchange for benefits, as well as a link to my Twitch channel where you can support me through subscriptions and bits, as well as a PayPal if you're feeling generous. Thanks for listening to my speech, and we're gonna get back to the video. We pick up immediately where the story last time ended. Batman is in the tunnel bleeding out. Meanwhile, Commissioner Yindel and her squad are closing in on his location. Hoping to cause a distraction, allowing him to escape, Batman rigs the Joker's bodies with explosives. And as one last parting gift to his old rival, the Joker, he spits on the face of his corpse, which honestly goes insanely hard. An officer approaches the scene and reports to Yindel that the body of the Joker has been found, and that it is indeed a murder. But what he doesn't know is that the body is also rigged with explosives, which go off right in his face. He doesn't die. These aren't powerful explosives. These are just diversionary explosives. Batman's not a psychopath, or at least he's a psychopath with taste. Batman throws additional explosives to cause further chaos, and then he calls Robin on his communicator and tells her to bring the helicopter in. Commissioner Yindel orders Batman to freeze and pulls out her gun. In response, Batman simply punches her right in the face and takes her gun. And there's this really cool moment right before he makes his escape where he's holding the gun and he turns to the burning body of his old rival, the Joker, and he tells it to stop laughing at him. Even in death, Batman is still haunted by the Joker, and it's entirely likely that the Joker and his actions will haunt Batman for the rest of his life. He hears a SWAT team approaching his location, ready to open fire on him. He remarks on how they're probably armored, which means he won't have to hold back. For a moment while he's planning his escape, he blacks out and wakes up on the floor of the tunnel. He is, after all, incredibly injured and probably close to dead at this point. He takes a stimulant in order to stay conscious, and then he places a much larger explosive on the wall of the tunnel. As the SWAT team approaches Batman's location, he fires Yindel's gun at the explosives he placed on the wall, resulting in an explosion that distracts the SWAT team and begins collapsing the tunnel, allowing him to make his escape. Batman bursts out of the tunnel into the middle of a small army of cops. If it weren't for Robin, this would probably be where his story ends. But Robin's in the chopper now and throws a rope, catching Batman around the waist and pulling him to safety into the helicopter. And on the news, as it turns out, Batman openly attacking the police is not a good image. Gotham has requested that the state police be dispatched to Gotham City to deal with this. And after finding the charred corpse of the Joker, murder has officially been added to the list of charges against the Batman. Clark Kent looks up at the sky, sad. He knows that a line has been crossed today, and he knows that it's all over. We then cut to a news interview with a woman who was just assaulted on the streets of Gotham. She was walking down the road when an older gentleman came up to her and began catcalling her, the usual creepy behavior. This man was only looking for violence, and his target was this woman. And before she could defend herself, he begins attacking her. The creep's pulling out his weapon when there's this shriek. Straight out of hell, there's this shriek. It turns into a growl, a flapping of wings, big wings. Something wet happens to the creep. A side of beef slams into the lamppost. A switchblade snaps open. Bones start popping inside the creep. He's screaming and begging. What grabbed him is laughing, and so am I. One of the things that I love about Batman in this story is just how scary he is to others. Sure, other versions of the character beat their enemies to a pulp, and that's terrifying in itself. But this version of the Batman does what I've never seen any other do before, where he will just grab a target and systematically break them, one bone at a time. We see this image of Batman looming over this creep as he slowly starts breaking every bone in his body, laughing while he does it. It's a truly frightening image. And I'm not sure when this event takes place in the story because we now cut to Batman's current condition after his fight with the Joker. He's on a surgical table in the Batcave. Alfred is operating on him. It's pretty serious, but it looks like he's gonna pull through. Anyways, remember the Sons of the Batman? Well, now we're gonna get a glimpse at them and what their actions look like to someone who is observing them. The news is interviewing a young man who is in the hospital who witnessed an attack by the mutant gang, by the Sons of the Batman. And as we'll see, their methods set themselves far apart from Batman. This man was working at a gas station when 3 former members of the mutant gang come into the store to rob the place. They are wearing Richard Nixon masks. As we find out, these are part of a splinter gang from the mutants who call themselves, very creatively, the Nixons. An off-duty cop was in the gas station when he heard the commotion at the front. He draws his gun and heads toward the till. However, he only saw 2 out of the 3 robbers. It's never expressly said what happened to him, but I'm pretty sure that the Nixons took care of him. As the 3 successful robbers are heading for the door, a shotgun blast rings out, knocking one of the Nixons back. I keep wanting to say mutants, they're Nixons. And I'm sure Nixon was very happy with this comic. And without another word, the leader of the Sons of Batman, the person holding the shotgun, you might have guessed, steps into the gas station and violently executes the rest of the Nixons with his shotgun. This leader of the Sons of the Batman is barely 16 years old, and now he turns his attention to the teller. Apparently, he thought the teller should have put up a fight against the 3 gang members with guns trying to rob his store, and he says that the man doesn't deserve to run a gas station. So, without another word, the Son of Batman grabs a pair of wire cutters off one of the shelves at the store and relieves the teller of all of his fingers. On the news, a report on the remaining incarcerated mutant gang is underway when the broadcast is suddenly cut off by a special address from the President of the United States. The very first image that we see is President Reagan wearing a hazmat suit, which is probably not good. Reagan starts with the good news. It appears that Soviet forces have fully pulled out of the island of Corto Maltese. Clark Kent is going about his day as normal when he hears something unusual with his super hearing. Knowing exactly what is coming, he takes off at supersonic speed. Reagan then states the bad news. It appears that the reason the Soviets have pulled out of Corto Maltese is because they are officially committing an act of escalation. Superman is now flying above the clouds, and heading toward him at blinding speed is a giant Soviet missile. And he tries his best to intercept it, but the missile is very powerful. I bet you forgot the Cold War was happening. The war is no longer cold anymore. And for the people of Gotham, it's just an ordinary day. Gordon is returning home from the grocery store in a foul mood. His wife made him get up while he was reading to go and find beans that ended up being impossible to track down. Meanwhile, it's been a month since he quit smoking cigars. Everyone around him is extremely proud, but it's left him very on edge and irritable. He's passing by an electronics store when he hears the words that people back then, and even people still today, still fear to hear, and that is nuclear warhead. The current nature of the missile is unknown, but it is heading straight for Corto Maltese. And what is known is that a missile of this size is perfectly capable of leveling the island completely. In the president's bunker, Reagan is still refusing to retaliate against the Soviets. First, he wants to see what their secret weapon is capable of doing to this missile. The secret weapon in question is trying as hard as he can to stop the missile, but the sheer size of the missile and the speed at which it was currently going is making it very hard to redirect it. The pilot, who is keeping track of the missile as well, says that the magnetic pulse generated by this missile could be capable of wiping out all electronics, but the news anchor who's interviewing him keeps cutting him off. The pilot yells over the news anchor to try and say that the missile has been redirected. It seems that Superman's efforts were successful. However, the magnetic pulse is still a very legitimate threat to the US. Having done all he can, Superman tries to put as much distance between him and the missile as possible, but it seems that that is a futile effort. The warhead detonates over the desert, sending Superman flying, and all of the power in Gotham City, and presumably most of America, goes out. Bruce Wayne wakes up at that exact moment in his surgical bed. In an instant, he knows what's happened, and he knows that Superman is responsible. See, Bruce has been keeping up with weapons development on both sides of the Cold War, and he knows that both sides were working on exactly this kind of a device that was purely meant to generate a strong electromagnetic pulse that would disable an entire country. This kind of weapon would leave a nation completely defenseless against further nuclear attack, and it appears that the Soviets got there first. But more importantly, he knows that since Clark works for Washington, that he must have known about these weapons too. In redirecting that missile, he increased the effective radius of the bomb, shutting down even more of America than might have been affected. Although he did save the lives of the people of Corto Maltese. But now everyone is screwed, ultimately. And this makes Bruce very angry. Clark, you idiot. You let them do it. I always knew you would. Fresh from the operating table, Bruce dons his costume again, and him and Robin head for the stables. With all electrical equipment, including vehicles, disabled, they're gonna have to go old school. And in the streets of Gotham, the entire city is in chaos. People are screaming and running and tripping over each other. And as Gordon is there on the street witnessing the whole pandemonium, him and hundreds of Gotham residents come very quickly to find out that the disabling of all electronic equipment includes aerial vehicles as well. They all watch in horror as a plane crashes into the side of a tower. The flaming debris lands on the ground, igniting the gas tanks of all the vehicles on the streets below. And for anyone who hasn't seen my disclaimer already, this comic was released well before 2001. So I know it sounds similar, but it's not, I promise. And in Gotham City Jail, it appears that the blackout has led to a massive revolt, particularly from the mutants. They've managed to disarm one of the guards and use his own weapon to kill both him and the other guard present. Inspired, this group of mutants in the cells rally around the mutant who was responsible for the murder, and they all resolve to break out. And outside Gotham City, the Sons of the Batman are preparing for war. Their leader is yelling to the masses who have gathered in the dump there that this is their time, and how in the chaos that Gotham has now been plunged into, this is their moment to seize control and to purge the scum of Gotham City. And if you notice, there's a lot of similarities between this scene and the scene that we saw in issue 2 of The Dark Knight Returns with the mutant leader. We see two large groups of young, violent people all rallying to the cry of their leader, who is telling them to swarm the streets and kill relentlessly. The mutants may have switched their figurehead, but it seems that their methods are basically the exact same. The Sons of the Batman are a perversion of what Batman really stands for. And now, finally, Batman does something about it. Batman arrives in their midst, riding a giant black horse. He looks on this group of violent young people with a burning fire for justice, and he knows that that fire can be molded. Meanwhile, Gordon is watching helplessly as the fire in town spreads west, right towards his home, where his wife Sarah is. Panicked, the man in his 70s begins sprinting towards his home through the thick black smoke of the fire. He collapses against a streetlight for a moment, fearing that he might be having a heart attack. But after calming himself down, he keeps on running into the smoke. Meanwhile, Robin watches as Batman's booming voice fills the junkyard where the Sons of Batman have gathered. He grabs the shotgun out of the leader of the Sons of Batman's hands and breaks it in two with his bare hands.
Our weapons are precise and quiet. In time, I will teach them to you. But for tonight, you will rely on your brains and your fists. Tonight, we are the law. Tonight, I am the law.
Batman is able to take their fighting spirit and turn it into something that he can work with. This kind of serves as a full circle moment for the mutant gang. This group of young people were attracted to the mutant leader because he represented authority for them. He kind of served as their father figure. And using this authority he had over them, he twisted and corrupted them, turning them to violence. When Batman dethroned him, the mutants split and followed various other figures of authority, like the Joker. The Sons of Batman were gravitated towards Batman as their kind of like figurehead leader, but their only exposure to Batman was his violence towards their former leader. And so they kind of take this on as a message or a lesson on how to deal with crime and violent people. And now he's back to correct that and provide genuine fatherly guidance to this group. Essentially, he is taking on an army of Robins, not just one. Using only his words, Batman is able to rally an army to bring order to Gotham City now that it's on fire. Meanwhile, Gordon is still running home, the smoke getting thicker and thicker the closer he gets to his house. A gas line explodes outside of his building, which is completely engulfed in flames at this point. He starts yelling at the people panicking on the ground, trying to coordinate an effort to put out the fire, but no one is paying attention. The street is in chaos. Most people are fighting with fists and with bricks, struggling to find scraps of food and to survive. This is a great commentary on like American society in this comic, as it only takes one event to send civilized people into absolute anarchy and violence and animalistic behavior. In response, Gordon pulls out his gun, and suddenly people are way more willing to listen. The mutants have successfully broken out of Gotham Jail as well, and have begun immediately ransacking the city around them. But not for long, because Batman and his army of Robins arrive on the scene. I'm gonna keep calling them the Sons of Bat, but you know what I mean. Boys, girls, I'm here to appeal to your community spirit. I'm sure you're all eager to help. He recruits the remaining mutants as well, who join his army. Commissioner Yindel watches the whole thing unfold from the police building. An officer asks her what she wants to do about this, but she simply lowers her head, resigned, and says, "He's too big." This is a reference to the very last conversation that she had with former Commissioner Gordon. She now realizes that the spirit of the Batman is far larger than just the man himself. His is a movement that cannot be stopped or slowed. And so, like Commissioner Gordon did, she steps down and allows it to take its course. Speaking of Gordon, he has successfully rallied and united the people. The need to survive has been overtaken by the need to save. They form a line and begin passing buckets of water to put out the fire. Meanwhile, nurses are tending to the wounded as best as they can. And Gordon's own heart is under control for the moment, even though there is still no sign of Sarah. And now we get to what is, for me, probably the coolest Superman scene I have ever seen in movies or comics or anything. Superman wakes up at the very epicenter of the nuclear detonation, and his thoughts are immediately of Batman. "You cannot touch my planet without destroying something precious. Even her deserts are abundant. There were birds here who she blessed with chest feathers absorbent enough to carry water for miles to their children. Bullfrogs who slept for years in dried out riverbeds, then dug their way to the surface when the rains came. Now, there's only blackened glass, endless flame. Our people, Bruce, you laugh at them. They can do this, and you laugh." He feels as if it is his duty to guard and care for the Earth, even though humanity, who the planet actually belongs to, seems only concerned with destroying it, and Batman just laughs the whole while. And the whole while Superman is saying this, he has the appearance of a charred and emaciated corpse. One thing you may not realize if you're not like a hardcore DC fan or Superman fan in general is that he is not inherently strong. See, his super strength, super healing, all of his powers are derived from our sun. He feeds off of the rays of the sun or the radiation of the sun, whatever it is, but that is the source of all of his powers. And now, trapped in the middle of a nuclear storm that blots out the sun, he is severely burned. He is weak and he is struggling to fly above the cloud line. And before he can make it to taste the sun again, a huge lightning bolt passes right through him, striking him down to the ground again. And this is where the really cool scene comes in, because I've never seen any other piece of media do this specific thing regarding Superman's reliance on the sun for his strength. He lands in a grassy jungle, near dead. Since the sun and the sky have failed him, he turns his attention to the earth. Placing his hands on the grass and on the flowers below him, he asks the earth to save him and give him strength. And as all the jungle around him almost instantaneously withers and dies, he stands up fully healed and fully restored. I love this scene because he harvests essentially the solar energy from the plants that are all around him to fuel his strength, so that he doesn't have to rely on the sun. This is something I've never seen done anywhere else, and it is insanely cool. As Gordon is helping to put out the fire in his apartment building, he sees a woman run out of the building on fire and screaming. She's Sarah's height and has similar hair and clothing, but he can't be sure. She screams once more, then dies on the sidewalk. Gordon says with conviction that it wasn't Sarah, but I think this is more of a comfort than it is an actual fact. And now we have another segment of the comic where witnesses are describing to the news events after the fact, so I'm just going to run through the story that we are about to watch. Remember the guy from the last video who pushed a crippled person in front of an oncoming subway train? Well, he's back, and he's worse than ever, spoiler alert. Bet you thought you'd seen the last of him. I thought I did too. Every time I reread this comic, I have to watch this guy work again. And in no surprise to anyone, when all the chaos erupted, he immediately turned on everybody. We also find out in his interview that he's a racist, which really is just the cherry on top for his character, isn't it? And it's almost to a comical degree too. Like, this man feels like a caricature in so many ways. He even does the whole, now I'm not racist, but... And spoiler alert, what he says afterwards is incredibly racist. He sees a dead cop on the street and immediately grabs his gun. And seizing control using said gun, he rallies a mob. And this mob comes across a group of looters who have relieved a grocery store of all their supplies and food. And the mob decides to, in turn, relieve the looters of their goods. A fight erupts, and the guy starts shooting people left, right, and center, of course. And then the cavalry arrives. Batman and Robin, alongside a large army of the Sons of the Batman and the mutants combined, arrive on the scene. Some are on horseback, but some are on foot. The man with the gun panics and points the gun at Batman to defend himself. That was his big mistake. In true Batman fashion, he grabs the man from on top of his horse, lifts him above his head, and with a great heave throws him as far as he can, breaking 3 of the man's ribs and putting him in a neck brace. And the man in the interview has the audacity to say that he's gonna press charges as soon as Batman is brought in. What a guy. Thankfully, we never have to see him again. We then get to a very small moment in the comic, but this is one of my favorite moments in the whole series because it speaks volumes about Batman and his character at this point. It's literally 2 panels long, but it impacted me so much. It's entirely told from Robin's perspective. From his horse, Batman gives orders to the Sons of the Bat and to the mutants, and they all disperse to carry out his orders. So now it's just him and Robin alone on the street. And when it's just the 2 of them alone, all of Batman's strength fades away. His shoulders slump and he hunches over in the saddle, completely and utterly exhausted. For a moment, he's not the powerful and invincible Batman that everyone else sees. Now that it's just him and Robin, he is just a tired, old man. It's a really cool moment, not only because it reminds us, the audience, that he's not only human, but a much older human, but it also shows that he's willing to be vulnerable in front of Robin. He is at the point where he trusts her completely. It's only once in the whole night that it shows. He's given orders, and all the mutants and Sons of Batman and everybody are gone for a minute. He just sags in his saddle, like an old man. Then he straightens up and grins at me like it's funny. He can't die. After a moment of weakness, he straightens and puts back on the facade of the powerful and invincible Batman. Meanwhile, Gordon turns, hearing a very familiar voice on the street. As it turns out, Sarah had forgotten to tell Gordon that she also needed milk when he went out, and so she had gone to the grocery store and wasn't there when their home burned down. Reunited, the 2 embrace in front of the inferno of their old house. It's a great character moment for Gordon because that's always been a big complaint for him, is Sarah always needing one more thing. It's something that drives him up the wall. Just before all this chaos started, he was grumbling to himself on how he had to interrupt his reading to go to the store because Sarah needed one more thing. But now she is alive purely because she needed one more thing. And now all the resentment that he held towards that little quirk of hers is gone. I thought that was a really cool character moment and a moment of good growth for Gordon. And we now jump forward in time 1 week after all of those events went down. The power is back on, but the effects of the bomb are still very much apparent. Namely, it's an August afternoon, but it's snowing outside, and no one has seen the sun for a week. I forgot to turn my fan off, dadgummit. Hang on, you guys are gonna get good sound for the rest of this video. That was the one thing I forgot to do. Just one more thing. And on the news, they're talking about how this bomb was specifically designed by the Soviets to dramatically alter the weather of wherever it was dropped. The bomb threw enough soot in the atmosphere to completely blot out the sun, and now people are freezing to death across America. And the lack of sun has also affected the crops, meaning that a massive famine is on the way. Meanwhile, Superman and Ronald Reagan are having a discussion about Batman. It's unclear exactly what they're talking about, but the main takeaway is that they both know that Batman will refuse to be brought in alive. And in Wayne Manor, Bruce is having a meeting with Oliver, a former member of the Justice League who went by the name Green Arrow. You might recognize him from the CW show Arrow. A blink and you miss it detail from this scene is that Bruce is now walking around the house with the assistance of a cane, which further accentuates just how old he is at this point and how worn down his body is from all the fighting and all the years of fighting. Oliver is currently criticizing Bruce's approach to fighting crime. Like Superman has said numerous times at this point, the world has changed, and Batman makes far too much noise to be allowed to continue to operate. And after Oliver broke out of prison, he took to the shadows and started fighting from within. The world thinks that Oliver is dead, and so to keep that narrative alive, the US government will cover up everything that he does to them in order to keep that narrative alive. He is in a position where his enemies have to cover up his existence in order to perpetuate the narrative that he doesn't exist. But Bruce, Batman, has made such a public noise that they definitely have to kill him. To which Bruce asks Oliver why he would risk coming back. Oliver says that he always knew that it would come down to just Batman and Superman. To borrow a phrase that Commissioner Gordon and Yindel have used at this point, they're both just too big. And when that fight comes, Oliver wants a piece of him, for old time's sake. He gestures to where his left arm should be. The implication, of course, is that in whatever confrontation happened 10 years ago, Superman took Oliver's arm in the process. Bruce sits as Robin learns to ride on horseback. To himself, he begins thinking about what has to be done, what he needs to do now. And Robin is one of the main reasons on why he has to do it. She is young and has a future ahead of her. And if he doesn't do what he has to do, then that future is put in jeopardy. Everything is coming to an end. And Superman knows it too. A blast of heat comes from the sky, writing words on the ground right in front of Bruce. The message is a single word. Where? Superman is allowing Batman to choose where his last stand will be. Bruce looks up at the sky and says Crime Alley, the place where years ago his parents were murdered and Batman was born. And on the news, President Reagan has imposed limited martial law in order to keep America safe and intact. With everything going on, chaos very much reigns in America at this time. Violence and looting in America are at an all-time high, everywhere except in one place. Thanks to Batman and his small army, the streets of Gotham, for once in the whole city's existence, are in complete peace. Commissioner Yindel refuses to comment on the situation. It seems she has finally adopted Commissioner Gordon's position on the Batman. And in the Wayne Infirmary, it seems that Bruce's body is not healing well at all. He takes a stimulant in preparation for the fight, and then starts putting on layers and layers of harnesses and armor. And for one final time in his life, he speaks to the spirit of the Bat, that ancient monster that appeared to him when he was a boy, and brought him back into the fold. When you came for me in the cave, I was just 6 years old. You were ancient. Nothing could kill you. But the war, it did not begin then. No, it was 2 years later, when her necklace caught on his wrist, when he shoved his pistol into her jaw and pulled the trigger, and everything my mother was struck the pavement as a bloody wad. That night began 30 years of hunting thieves and murderers. Is that what you intended? Somewhere in the endless night, like a bellow from a wounded bear, the answer comes. U.S. troops have fully pulled out of the street known as Crime Alley, and helicopters are hovering overhead. Reporters are speculating that the U.S. is staging a fight between Batman and Superman. Meanwhile, Batman continues to prepare. He has several tricks up his sleeve, including one big one. After his stimulant, he takes another pill, one that is designed to take effect in exactly 1 hour. His greatest trick. Batman, now outside of Crime Alley, positions his tank. Only 20 minutes until the pill takes effect. And Robin asks if Batman could please tell her the plan. She asks if he is going to die tonight, to which he simply turns and says, "Figure I will." Superman arrives with a military escort. The battle is here. Superman scans the alleyway with his X-ray vision, hunting for Batman. Those X-rays activate the 6 Hunter missiles that Batman has placed to test Superman. If Superman is at full power, he could easily dodge the missiles Batman placed, but it seems that he is still recovering from that huge blast. Batman watches as the missiles toss Superman around for a while. Meanwhile, Batman is wearing a full suit of metal armor. This is the suit that directly inspired the suit from Batman v Superman. And I love both designs, to be honest. They're dramatically different, but they're similar in a lot of ways, and I love both designs. We then cut to Alfred in the Batcave. He is reminiscing on a memory of Bruce as a child. And fun fact, Alfred's, not his dialogue, but his thought bubbles, like his text bubbles, the font is different. They're a lot neater and a lot more fancy than any of the other text in this comic. It's weird and kind of cool because it sets him apart from the rest of the characters as, you know, this very proper, like, you know, British figure that Alfred always is. Strange to think of that particular evening. More than 40 years passed. Master Bruce was but 9 years old, and restless as he always was at night. Still he sat politely enough on his bed as Alfred read to him. The purloined letter, yes, that was the story. He listened in silence as, finishing the tale, I explained the importance of Mr. Poe's contribution to detective fiction. Then, with a voice like steel, so frightfully formal, his dark eyes flashing, Master Bruce asked, no, demanded, the killer was caught and punished. I assured him that the villain had met justice. Bruce slept like a boy. Superman lands. He's breathing heavily, but hardly fazed by the missiles that have been beating him around. Batman looks at the timer on his wrist. He only has 11 minutes until that pill takes effect. Everything is exactly on schedule. And now it's Robin's turn. Piloting the Batmobile, Robin charges at Superman, firing rounds from the main guns. The force does cause Superman to stumble temporarily. However, with ease, Superman picks up the Batmobile with his bare hands and tears the hull apart.
Isn't this a school night, young lady?
Clark! This is between you and me.
And now we come to the standoff. Batman is standing underneath the streetlight where his parents died. Superman is hovering above him. Now he's talking, trying to reason with me. I can't hear him, of course. No, my ears are protected. So all I have to worry about is my teeth, rattling from my jaw or shattering like every window on the block when I hit him with the Sonic. Batman pulls out a sonic gun and unleashes a blast so powerful that it destroys the whole city block and leaves Superman in agony. And in his head, Batman mocks him. A nosebleed so soon, Clark? Don't drop now. The night is young, and I have so much planned. Superman lands, crushing the sonic gun with his bare hands. Meanwhile, Batman hooks up a device to the streetlight behind him that connects directly to his suit. Now connected to Gotham City's power grid, Batman clamps his hands over Superman's head and uses every single watt of the entire city's power to cook Superman alive. Still talking? Keep talking, Clark. You've always known just what to say. Yes, you always say. Yes to anyone with a badge or a flag. No good. The feedback. I'm not getting 100th of what you are, but it's getting bad ahead of schedule. What didn't hit you or me fed this suit, Clark. It's way past time you learned what it means to be a man. Having fully charged his suit, Batman clobbers Superman with the force of a tank. Superman retaliates, grabbing Batman's helmet and ripping it off. Still in the Batmobile, a pre-recorded message from Batman kicks on for Robin. Now that Superman is fully distracted by Batman's attack, he is willing to tell her the real plan. On the street, Batman and Superman continue trading blows. You sold us out, Clark. You gave them the power that should have been ours, just like your parents taught you to. My parents taught me a different lesson. Lying on the street shaking in deep shock, dying for no reason at all. They showed me that the world only makes sense when you force it to. You may have noticed that Batman v Superman borrows a lot of lines of dialogue from this comic, but I feel like with the context of this story, they hit way harder in this context. Superman delivers a devastating blow, breaking 3 of Bruce's ribs. Batman is cornered, but he's right where he wants to be. Now it's Oliver's turn. He takes a glance and realizes that Oliver was found by US troops and is desperately trying to escape and survive. There's only a minute left until the pill he took takes effect, and Batman needs to distract Superman so that he doesn't notice that Oliver's there. At least long enough for Oliver to get a shot. He throws acid in Superman's face, burning him, and follows that up immediately with an explosive. At last, he's gotten Superman angry. It's now or never. Pulling the bowstring back with his teeth, Oliver fires an arrow at Superman. And I'll say right now that Oliver and Robin get away from the scene fine. I'm saying that now because I don't want to interrupt this moment, because this moment is fantastic. The arrow explodes in a green cloud. It was obviously made of pure kryptonite. It wasn't easy to synthesize, Clark. It took years and it cost a fortune. Luckily, I had both. Superman looks up with fear and concern for Bruce.
Bruce, your heart.
And now that the kryptonite has taken full effect, Batman begins ruthlessly beating Superman into the ground. This is the end for both of us. We could have changed the world. Now look at us. I've become a political liability. And you're a joke. Superman is bleeding on the sidewalk. Batman's hands are clamped around Superman's neck like a vice. The two stare into each other's eyes, both knowing that Batman has won this fight. I want you to remember, Clark, in all the years to come, in your most private moments, I want you to remember my hand at your throat.
I want you to remember the one man who beat you.
Bruce!
With that, Bruce's heart flatlines and he falls to the ground. Alfred stands outside Wayne Manor, which was set to explode the moment that Bruce died. Now that his identity will be known to the public, all evidence of his activities had to go. The clock strikes 12. The ancient moor trembles beneath my feet. Deep underground computers holding every precious secret of the Batman burst and burn. Mrs. Wayne's priceless collection of porcelain shatters musically. Empty stables fly apart like toothpick models. central mass of Wayne Manor shudders as if alive, then vanishes in a flash bright as the sun. The world turns ruby red. The manor roof rises madly into the sky, riding a pillar of flame. A jolt travels the length of my spine. Of course, I think, as my head goes light. How utterly proper. Having completed his care of Bruce to the very end, Alfred collapses dead in front of the manor he had spent decades caring for. And at Crime Alley, Superman cradles the body of his old friend, who gave his life just to prove a point. The troops come to collect the body. Superman glares at them intensely. All that he can say is, "Don't touch him." And at his funeral, the minister commends his soul, and everyone there is left to grieve. Among those in attendance are Jim Gordon, Selina Kyle, and Clark Kent. Screaming and crying, Selina tries to confront Clark. She blames him directly for Bruce's death, but Gordon stops her, and the two walk away. Clark remains behind to grieve, even though the people around him are surprised that he even had the nerve to show his face here. And the news, of course, had a field day with the events of that day. The report is that the Batman, now officially identified as billionaire Bruce Wayne, suffered a fatal heart attack while fighting government troops. His manor was completely leveled to the ground by his butler Alfred, who died from a stroke at the scene. Any evidence of his vigilantism and his methods burned in the fire that burned the manor to the ground. Mysteriously, the Wayne fortune is missing now, though. All of his banks were emptied and every stock sold prior to his death. The body of Bruce Wayne was claimed by his only surviving relative, a distant cousin. And as we find out, that distant cousin is actually Robin. They're not actually related, they just fudged the documents. Now at the cemetery, only Clark and this distant cousin remain. Superman begins to walk away when he hears something faint with his super hearing, like a light flutter. He turns to face the relative, who stares at him. Her face is obscured by mourning clothes. Mourning the grief, not mourning the time. Quickly, that flutter increases in frequency and strength, transforming into a heartbeat from 6 feet underground. Clark's expression changes to one of shock and curiosity. He leans forward and examines the cousin, quickly identifying that it's Robin in disguise. Finally realizing what is happening here, he just smiles, winks at Robin, and then walks away, without saying a word. My timing wasn't quite precise enough. Clark heard. That was the first thing Robin told me when she dug me up. Not that it mattered. He'd have guessed sooner or later. He knows how good I am with chemicals. I was counting on what Oliver said, and with a wink, Clark proved Oliver right. He'll leave me alone now. In return, I'll stay quiet. So will Robin, and the rest. In a cave, Bruce, Robin, and the small army that he'd amassed begin planning. Their first order of business is to set up a camp and establish a steady supply of drinking water. They will be here for a long time, and they need to prepare. Here, he will train them all. He will show them in detail his ways and his methods, and additionally, what they are supposed to do with that training. As Oliver had said, now they will operate from the shadows. Now that the Batman is dead, his followers will now act in his stead, and the government will have to protect them in order to keep the narrative alive that Batman died fighting government troops. Years to train and study and plan. Here in the endless cave, far past the burnt remains of a crime fighter whose time has passed. It begins here, an army, to bring sense to a world plagued by worse than thieves and murderers. This will be a good life. Good enough. And that is the end of The Dark Knight Returns. This is my favorite Batman story of all time, and that is for a number of reasons. Batman spent the entire series knowing that things were out of control, and he spent all of that time searching for what he could call a good death. But now at the end of the series, surrounded by a generation that he can mentor and train, he realizes that he has instead found a good life worth living. It is the perfect ending for a character who never knew when to stop. And there are sequels to this story, but this is an amazing self-contained story. I can't really bring myself to read all of the graphic novels that preceded this after reading a story so well done. And Batman's conflicts all throughout this series challenged him in very real, very existential ways. Batman returned to crime fighting after 10 years of retirement because he realized that he was incapable of changing who he was. And Two-Face in issue 1 forces him to confront this about himself, as well as the monster nature inside of him, that spirit of the bat that kind of drives him. And the mutant leader in issue 2 makes him realize that he can't fight using his own strength anymore. If he's going to survive in the modern day against modern evils, he has to evolve and he has to change. And the Joker in issue 3 challenges his moral code. Is it worth taking one life and saving so many others in that process? Is it worth losing that small piece of humanity that he's kept onto, or that he's held onto? And Superman in issue 4 not only represents the old world that they used to fight for, but also the new regime that came along and killed it. In this issue, Superman is Batman's closest friend and his worst enemy. He is Bruce's perfect death and his way out. Batman died fighting the most powerful man on Earth, but not before letting him and the regime he stands for know that he was above them. He tarnished their perfect image forever, and then he laid it all down. The smackdown was a message. Neither Superman or the government that he represented was invincible, and he didn't want to do anything with that, but he wanted them to know that. Much like the Joker, even though he died at the end of the fight, it was still indisputable that he won the fight. In a battle of political forces, he got the last word. Batman's return was the perfect storm, and Superman was the only thing that was capable of stopping his escalation. But Batman still chose to go out on his own terms. Like in Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, the idea of the Batman became more important than the man himself. And since that legend had a fitting end, fighting the most powerful man on Earth, the idea can live on. And I do also want to take this time to talk about a little bit of a headcanon I have with Bruce and the Batman in this universe. And this specifically works because of certain lines of dialogue he uses, certain attitudes he has towards certain things, as well as the time period in which this is set. And if I'm right, it would be one possible explanation on how Bruce learned how to fight or to handle a firearm, even though he is generally opposed to it. But we see in the comic that he is very capable of handling firearms. What inspired this thought initially was his constant reference to Robin as a soldier. He would refer to Robin and the people he fought with as soldiers, and this crusade that he was on he would call a war. And it would also explain why he is so opposed to the American government as well, or why he has issues with how they operate. And so my personal theory, with very limited evidence admittedly, is that Bruce Wayne is a veteran of the Korean War. This doesn't affect the story in any way, but I feel like it would provide explanation for certain aspects of his character and his treatment of others. Plus, the years line up. When the Korean War was happening, he would have been in his late teens or early 20s. My guess is that he either enlisted or was drafted into the war and excelled in all aspects of his training, including combat and firearm training, even though he was still morally opposed to guns after the incident where a gun was used on his parents. He entered the war and used his training plus his own personal methods in order to excel in combat. However, I believe that while he was overseas, he quickly became disillusioned with America and their police action in Korea. Maybe he saw something over there, or maybe one of the officers he served with did something overseas. But whatever the case, he saw or did or witnessed something that changed him. Or maybe it was a domino effect, but one way or another he came to realize that there was no honor or justification in this war. Now obviously he didn't desert, because there's no indication that he was ever like dishonorably discharged from the army, at least in this story. But I do think that after he finished his tour, he resolved to continue the fight back home, but on his own terms. He had his own moral compass and resolved to fight against tyranny, whether it was tyranny from the underworld or tyranny from the government, any form of tyranny. And as we saw in this story, there was tyranny on all sides. There was corruption on all sides. So that's my headcanon for the origin story of this Bruce Wayne, in addition to the usual, like, parents dead in the street. I do believe that this is another addition to his character that makes sense in this story. And dealing with corruption and tyranny on all sides relates to another reason that I love this comic so much. This mainly applies to comic book movies rather than comic books themselves, but I am of the belief personally that superhero movies should not be a genre of film. And I don't mean this to say that comic book movies shouldn't exist. I do find enjoyment in them, but they shouldn't be their own genre, because it's a very limiting genre. When I think of comic book movies that stand out from the other ones, I think of the movies where they take the character from the comic book and place him in a different genre. For example, Captain America: The Winter Soldier. That was a spy thriller, and the Joker is a psychological thriller and a character study. And I am of the mind that Batman is the perfect character to place within a film noir or neo-noir context. They did this with Robert Pattinson's Batman, and they also do this in The Dark Knight Returns. The film noir and neo-noir genres are primarily characterized by characters who are very cynical of the world around them. They are characterized by intricate plot lines, and they are characterized by very existential themes. Batman as a character was made for the noir genre, and The Dark Knight Returns is a perfect example of a noir comic. It's a perfect example of what I'm saying, taking a comic book character and placing him into a different genre leads to some amazing story and amazing writing. And with that, this concludes our series on The Dark Knight Returns. And if you've stuck around this long to the end of the series and to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. It means a lot that you would stick around for the whole series and maybe enjoy the other videos as well that I've been posting. And for those who are interested, I will be uploading an ultra long video that is all of the Dark Knight Returns series in one video with a new intro and a new outro that people can watch in just one sitting, but there is also a playlist on this channel where you can watch the individual videos themselves as well. And thank you so much to the patrons who have supported me this far. RD, Sean, and my top tier patron Snowy, thank you so much for supporting my content and supporting my goal of doing this full time for you all. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. We are nearly at 400 subscribers, and it means a lot that you would support me and support the videos that I'm making. I have a lot of great videos planned, great stuff coming in the future, and I hope you stick around for the ride because I have a lot of scripts in the works right now. For those who are new here, not only do I do videos like this where I break down stories that I find very interesting and very compelling, not only do I do that, and analyze films and such, but I do also create projects of my own. I have several short films that you can watch on this channel that are linked in the description below. And I have many more projects in the works. If you want some behind the scenes little glimpses of things that I am working on, please consider supporting me on Patreon and becoming a member. A member of the Patreon. Memberships aren't open on this channel. With all that said, thanks for watching to the end of this video and of this series, and I will see you next week for whatever I have planned next. I hope you're excited for that because I know that I am. And cut.